Hi, I'm Cheryl Brunette, and today I'm going to show you a provisional cast on for when you're just not quite sure what you want to do at the beginning of that sweater or whatever piece it is you're making. The provisional cast on has other applications besides just the bottom of sweaters that you're not sure how you want to finish. It's used, for example, in a variation of a toe-up sock in which you do the provisional cast on and then you work a series of short rows to make your toe. Get down here, you turn around, you go back up, pick up all these short rows so that you may have made like a little pocket in there. And then when you get up here, you've got some live stitches. You pick up these ones that you left on the provisional cast on and you continue up the foot of your sock and with circular needles. Another way it's frequently used is, let's say you have a scarf or a shawl that has a very fancy edge on it, and you knit it from the center down. Please excuse my drawing. On the best of days, it looks like a second grader, and on the worst of days, I've injured my finger, so it's a little bit harder today. So you knit down, you knit down, and you knit down, and at the bottom, you have a fancy lace pattern that gives you a kind of scallop. Then you come back and pick it up along here, and again, you knit down and knit down so that it's symmetrical. This could be a scarf, it could be a shawl, it could be a table runner, anything in which you want this symmetry, so you knit out two different ways. So there are lots of applications, and frankly, there are a lot of ways to do them. I can think of 4 different ways, and I don't even use them that often, and that's just off the top of my head. But today I'm going to show you my favorite, which uses a crochet hook. You need a smooth yarn and a crochet hook that is the size of your main yarn. Now notice my main yarn is considerably larger than my provisional cast on yarn. And it doesn't have to be the same size at all, but it's important that the hook be a size that works with this yarn and not with this yarn. So you start by just doing a chain. And you chain about, let's say 6 or 8 stitches more than you are going to use for your provisional cast on. You start with a slip knot. And for those of you who are not familiar with crochet or crochet hooks, it really is, your crochet hook is a very valuable tool in knitting, and I'll start looking at that more closely at some point. But I'm going to do 8 stitches today. So I'm going to chain roughly 13 or 14 stitches. And I do it this way. I just hook around. I go 1, 2. Notice I'm making really big stitches, almost sloppy. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, about 14. Now that's going to give you some overhang, and I'll cut the end of that. And there is my chain. Now, on one side, it's hard to tell because this is so loosely done, but on one side it is a series of V's. And on the other side, it is a series of kind of like little loops. They're like, it looks like waves to me, waves in the ocean. Here is, I know, I'm going to show you an absolutely ludicrous sample. I found this in among the stuff that I got from my mom. Who knows why she had that in there, but that woman would try out anything at any time. So probably it came along as a novelty item in the 70s, and she thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, and went for it. Here it is, done with my new clothesline that I needed. Brand new rope. It's a little kinky. And I used this thing, and you can see here is that nice big chain. By the way, I wouldn't recommend crocheting clothesline. It's a little bit stiff, but it's easier for you to see it at this scale. And I didn't, of course, get all the stitches perfectly even, but when you flip it over, it's easy. There, see, it's easier to see those nice little oceany loops. But you get to something like this and you go, oh, that you could go into the wrong hole. What we're going to do is we're going to pick up the stitches on this side and we're going to pick them up in these loops, these wave loops. But if you happen to, and in this case it's right there, but if by error you picked it up in there, it would be okay. Don't worry. It will not elegantly zip out at the end when you want to remove this. Basically, what it is waste yarn, but you can always snip it off and work it out quite easily. But ideally, you will pick it up in this part of the crochet chain every time. Okay, so let me go back to my real chain, and it doesn't really matter which direction. I like to pick it up in this direction, just because I can see that loop a little bit better than I can in the opposite direction. And this is going to be the needle that I use for my knitting, but I'm going to pick up the stitches on it. Well, no, I'm not. I'm going to pick it up on that size needle. And I'm going to start right there, and I'm going to pick up 8 stitches. So I insert in that hole. Let me get a lot of props here today. And I'm going to put the yarn around it and just pull it through. There's 1 stitch. 2. 3. Come up to that next one. 4. Whoops. See, if you flip it, you could go into that V part of it, but let's try to keep it on that side. 5, 6, 7, 8. To figure out whether or not you've picked picked them up in exactly the right space, all I have to do is flip it over and say, does that look like a chain there? And see how that looks almost like a bind off, like a chain bind off, because it is essentially the same sort of stitch. So there they are. That one should zip out pretty nicely. Look, I have plenty of extra, and that doesn't matter at all because we're just going to pull it out. So I have my 2, 4, 6, 8 stitches, and all I have to do is turn it around and start knitting. And I can just go from there. And what I have are some loops at the edge. Okay, but what I'm going to do is set this down because you don't need to watch me knit. What you need to see is, that was the easy part. I mean, lots of people demonstrate how to do a provisional cast on, but they don't show you how to get it off the provisional cast on, and to me, that's the challenging part. So let me show you how to do that. Here is another prop that was done identically. I cast on 8 stitches. Here they are down there, and all I did was do some garter stitch back and forth. Now, when it comes time to unzip this and take those stitches off, you have an interesting challenge. Let's come in really close and look at that challenge. When you count carefully, you will see that you do not have 8 stitches, you have 7 stitches. Well, you actually do have 8, but half of one of those stitches is over here and the other half is over there. And in between we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So when you come to pick up 8 stitches, and this is where you can thread it on a smaller needle because you aren't knitting it, you aren't working it, you're simply threading the stitches on. How do you pick those up? Well, of the 2 sides, for me, it's easier to pick up where I see these, what appear to be like pearl bumps. and I insert from that side. 1, oops, 2, 3. This is kind of splitty yarn. 4, 5. Once I get my 7 stitches on the needle, I have to make a choice. I can either make another stitch from this half stitch at this end by inserting a tapestry needle and coming down into this stitch down here and making a kind of fake little stitch, or I can come to this end and go down to what is essentially, it's not quite the row below, but it's like that. It is just turning the corner. I can pick up that little corner loop, which is half of a stitch on this side and half of a stitch on the other side, and use that. That is usually what I do, but it isn't absolutely necessary. And now that I have these on the needle, I'll show you how to unzip this little line. How you can tell what end you're at is I had pulled that through the end, and see the loop with the yarn coming through it? Just pull that through and it should unravel. Just zip out with any luck, and if it doesn't, I won't worry. I'll just slow it down. There it is. The whole thing right there, and just pull out, whoops, at the end. Here it is. Oh good, I forgot about this part. Let me get something pokey. At the very end, it's wrapped around a little bit, so just pull that out too. If you ever have any snarls or knots anywhere in your yarn or your threads, the answer is always go looser, looser, looser. Okay, so this looks pretty good, right? I have 8 stitches down here, 2, 4, 6, 8, and I have 8 stitches up here. This one is mounted improperly. When I picked up that half stitch, I had it twisted. But you can tell that this does not quite look like the rest of them, and that's because you've turned that half stitch. You can also see that at this end, I'm not all the way to the end there, that I have a little bit more. Actually, it's a half stitch that I have there. Okay, so how important is that? Well, let me show you a couple of samples that I did. This happens to be garter stitch, but earlier I did one in ribbing stitch. Well, if you were going to rib, that half stitch offset, I did it in beige just like I did this one, but then when I picked it up, I took off with the blue yarn so that it would be easy for you to see. So here I have a knit stitch going in this direction and a knit stitch going in that direction, and they are exactly offset by 1/2 stitch. That simply will be the nature of knitting off in 2 different directions. Okay, if you go this way and this way, they will always be jogged by 1/2 stitch. How much of a problem is it? Well, it's a big problem when you have something like a rib, and there are a lot of, well, almost any other kind of pattern stitch. Look at it on this side. Looks a little bit different, but still it's pretty obvious that this is not one continuous piece of knitting. So it would depend on what you were doing, whether or not that was a significant thing. For me, it probably always would be. Here I did the same thing, but I did stockinette stitch, and this is when the property of stockinette stitch to look the same right side up and upside down really works to your advantage. This looks like it's a single stitch going all the way up, but it isn't. This is actually a single stitch, and then it jogs over, and this is a single stitch coming down, but they mesh beautifully. If I turn it over this way, looks like it's going in that direction. The only place where this is out of line is at the edges. If you're putting this into some kind of a seam, or if you're putting maybe an applied I-cord or something along the edge, it's not very obvious. But this looks like the last single stitch, and it goes up there. Look at how this has a whole other stitch next to it. There is another half stitch here that is curled under, so you can't see it as much. So here's a half stitch, here's a whole stitch on this side. Likewise, on this edge, it hangs out. So this is a half stitch too wide, and this is a half stitch too wide. So again, it is offset. But if you're just looking in the center, then it looks as if it is all one piece of knitting. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you'll join me next time when we will take a little break from our series on edges, because I am so excited to show you something new that I'm working on. Until then, enjoy your knitting. Thank you for joining me today. You know, you mess up once and then you just keep messing up.